Hello everyone, welcome to Cheltenham Science Festival at Home in association with EDF Energy and the last of our series of videos exploring some of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. 17 ideas to transform our world from gender equality to zero hunger. My name is Greg Foote. I'm a science journalist on BBC TV and radio, also a YouTuber, podcaster and science communication trainer. And it's been a real pleasure to host this short series of 6 daily conversations supported by UK research and innovation. Each video has been introducing you to just one particular Sustainable Development Goal, SDG. And the plan has been to have a relatively concise conversation with 2 new guests each show. They might be scientists, engineers, activists, thought leaders. They guide us through the SDG and then help us explore what can be done to achieve it. These videos are pre-recorded, but there will be a live conversation happening in the YouTube chat. So do put any comments down there. And if you're watching this back at a later date, add that comment down to the conversation or join the conversation on Twitter. Use hashtag #CheltSciFest@home. Today we are looking at SDG number 13, climate action. The climate crisis is now affecting every country on every continent. It's disrupting national economies and affecting lives. It's costing people, communities and countries dearly today and even more so tomorrow. Joining me to discuss what can be done to help, I've got 2 fantastic guests. I've got young social justice activist Daze Aghaji and I've got Professor Mark Sutton at the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. Hello both.
Thank you.
So Daze, let's start with you. You stood as a candidate for the European election last year, I believe, under the banner of the Climate and Ecological Emergency Independent Group. So can you kick us off by painting a picture of the planet's climate situation? Where are we currently? Where could we be heading?
We could be potentially heading to extinction, not just for animals and wildlife, but also if we don't create radical change very soon, we could be seeing the ways that we're living now becoming like unimaginable. And I think that is the truly scary part about the climate crisis. It's very, very real to many people, especially people currently living in the global south, and where experience the same thing. Like even what people call lovely warm weather right now, it is a symptom of climate change and what's happening to our planet. So it's not looking great, but I think in this time, with everything that's going on, we should hold on to optimism and know that we can really create change and we can do it very soon.
Thanks, Daze. Mark, I know that you work closely with the United Nations on research in your area of expertise, which we'll get onto in a minute. First, though, can you give us the top lines of what has led us to this climate crisis and also what we need to do to tackle the target as set out in the Paris Agreement of keeping global temperature rise well below 2 degrees Celsius? Let's not get into how we tackle it just yet. We'll get to that. Just what we're going to need to tackle and what has led us there.
Okay, well, we've got a whole range of sectors. It's pretty much nearly everything we do when we use energy, when we travel, when we eat. It's pretty simple. So think about the traveling first. Every time using cars, every time using public transport, we're using a lot of energy. That energy's got to come from somewhere. When it's fossil fuels, we're taking the carbon out of the ground, putting it in the atmosphere. When it comes to farming, it's not just about carbon, it's about nitrogen as well. When we fertilize our crops, that's leaking out into the atmosphere, creating a gas called laughing gas, nitrous oxide. It's 300 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. It's going to be there for several hundred years. We've got to learn to farm with a higher nitrogen efficiency, less polluting. Now then, the third one, our food choices. Basically, long food chains have more losses. So the more dairy and the more meat we eat, the more liable we are to making more pollution for the climate than if we were more efficient with a more plant-based diet.
Before we actually turn to what we can do to achieve the goals of the United Nations and of the Paris Agreement, I've been asked to tell you that Cheltenham Festivals is a not-for-profit charity that works year-round to inspire the next generation of doctors, scientists and researchers. If you'd like to support this work, and myself and the other speakers and performers would hugely appreciate it if you do, you can make a donation at here, crowdfunder.co.uk/CheltScienceFest at home. Thanks. Okay, so on to what we can do. Daze, You're an active member of Extinction Rebellion, I believe. What do you and XR say that we could and what we should be doing?
I think XR is really asking for the really fundamental system change, which sometimes is quite like a grand idea and vision to hold. But this is kind of why we use our three demands to guide us through that. So the first is to tell the truth. We need to start actually telling the hard truth about the way the climate is currently. And we need to leave space for like grief and mourning for that as well. And then next, we should use that energy and channel it into something that's really great and really grand. And that's to, act now and take action now, not wait till later and not waste any more time. And then the third is basically how we can start creating better decisions, how we can start making like true democracy in our areas. And this is what we hopefully would think would be done through systems assembly, which is a form of direct democracy.
Yeah. Now, Mark, I said that we'd return to your area of research, and you've touched on it on a previous answer. When we talk about climate action, when we talk about a climate crisis, a couple of things are always mentioned: carbon dioxide and methane. But what people don't talk about is something you have just hinted at, and I know is a kind of big area for you. So tell us more.
Okay, so I've got the job of doing science, understanding it, turning into policy, raising awareness for nitrogen. And nitrogen is not something you hear about every day. Everybody talks about carbon. You get carbon footprints left, right and centre. But nitrogen is amazing because it's affecting climate, it's affecting water quality, it's affecting air quality, affecting biodiversity, human health. There's a different form of nitrogen in every sphere of the planet. What that means, if we manage our nitrogen better, we're going to get a hit on climate and all those other problems at the same time. And the other thing to bear in mind is it's really expensive. This is like making fertilizer, for example, but there's also air pollution nitrogen. If we were to halve the amount of waste of nitrogen on the planet, we'd be making a saving, a cash cost of $100 billion per year. So effectively, we're saying join all those parts, think in a joined up way, good for environment, good for development, and of course, good for the economy at the same time.
Right, so we're right to think about carbon, we're right to think about methane, but you say there's a part of this that's just not getting the attention it deserves.
Exactly. So the point there is we're here talking about Sustainable Development Goal 13 on climate. What I'm saying is that it's great that we're doing that. It's wonderful that Extinction Rebellion are raising awareness, but let's look at all these challenges together. By taking action on nitrogen, it's a way of building that partnership across the Sustainable Development Goals.
And what can we be doing? What should government be doing? What should industry be doing? And what can we be doing to reduce not just the nitrogen emissions and nitrogen pollution, but also our carbon emissions as well?
So let's just take where we are at the moment. We're in COVID, and it means we're travelling less. We're having this call from home. I'm really happy that I'm not at an airport. It's wonderful. A lot of our meetings are now happening over Zoom like this. That kind of transformation is something we might see after COVID. Are we going to be seeing a lot less travel, a lot more use of electronic things? Because all of those aeroplanes and the cars are massively polluting for air pollution and climate. Coming on to the food system, the way we grow our food really matters. Now, farmers are often in dire straits about how to make a living, but we've got to show them that there are opportunities for manage your manure better. Now, how many farmers have got a lid on their manure heap to keep the goodness in? Now, when you smell it, you're losing goodness. It's air pollution, climate change gases, etc. And then back to the point I mentioned before about our own food choices. Now, the kind of work we're doing, funded by UKRI in the South Asia Nitrogen Hub, we've got a situation there. South Asia is rapidly increasing its meat per consumption per person. That means in the future, even more pollution, even more effect on climate. So now take a UK side, let's learn lessons and find out how much do we really need to eat, can we eat less and be better for the climate and the wider environment.
Daze, there's something that I've heard you talk about quite a few times, and it's regenerative culture. Can you tell us a bit more about what that is and how we can achieve it?
So the way I think of regenerative culture is that regenerative cultures with an S, don't forget, because it can be many different types and many different ways as well. But it's a radical way of being and a radical way of caring. And it has around 5 main pillars. The first one is self-care. How can we learn to take care of ourselves? How can we learn to purge ourselves of this toxic system that we're currently living within. The second is interpersonal care, how we can learn to relate with one another with care and hold each other without our grief. And this kind of goes on to community work as well, which is the third one, which is community care, to really take care of our community and work as one to like fight everything. The fourth one being action care, which is one that really like Extinction Rebellion is very proud of, is how can we take care of each other during our high risk actions? How can we start to making sure that everyone's okay and everyone's well-being is being kept for? And then the final one is people and planet care, where how can we take these really amazing ways of learning with each other and taking care of each other? How can we use that to take care of the earth? So it's a really holistic way of looking at the environment, but also it can be used in any different ways. And once we start to foster this learning of a new culture, we can start really breaking down all other social issues as well, because we'll start having radical empathy with each other and start understanding each other and really listening. And through that, we can create change.
Do you think that that's kind of foundation is essential in order to start kind of turning the tide on the climate crisis?
Yeah, I definitely think so, because a lot of the time issues kind of happen when we don't listen to each other and we don't talk to each other and we don't confront these issues. Some things are really hard to talk about, like, for example, the climate crisis. It's quite an emotive thing, and some people totally get shut off from it, but some people thrive off it. And the people who get shut off from it, this is a time where we can actually be like, okay, I understand it's really hard to hear that our Earth is dying and that air pollution is real and people are dying from this. However, can I hold you in your grief? Can I comfort you? And can we take some steps together? And it's that way of like really learning how to care and live as each other, because we have to understand the climate crisis is almost a symptom from, you know, the toxic system that we're living within. And once we start learning how to respect ourselves, respect our community, respect the people that live on this earth with us, we will in turn learn how to respect the earth as well.
Yeah, I think empathy, openness to grief is very powerful. What do you think are the actions? What do yourself, Extinction Rebellion, and others believe we could be doing, and not just us, you know, higher up the chain, government, institution, to actually try to achieve the target and tackle the current climate and ecological emergency?
Yeah, I think in this time of COVID, it's really interesting, because the first thing we did was get scared and bulk buy, and then the next thing we did was making sure we take care of our community and the people who are seen as more vulnerable. And this is kind of just showing how we can truly make this happen. We can learn how to just be nice to each other and really like educate ourselves on issues that are happening and why they're happening. And once we start openly talking about this, even though it's so hard, once we start doing that, things will change, because we'll start listening and hearing each other. And I think the fundamental part of that is to make sure that once you listen, act, and don't just leave it for someone else to do, because this is our planet, this is our world and our futures as well.
So I was really interested to read the United Nations targets for Goal 13 for climate action. And a lot of them were about strengthening resilience, improving education, and of course, kind of mobilising a large cash sum to help all the communities around the world. But going back to what you were saying earlier, Mark, about meat consumption, especially in other places around the world. Actually, when we were preparing for this conversation, you introduced me to a new term that I wasn't aware of, which is Demetarian. Can you tell everyone about that, and also what it means for you as a scientist?
Yeah, no problem. So Demetarian, demi means half. So it means have an ambition to eat half the amount of meat you had before. Now, the reason we introduced this idea was about 10 years ago now, actually, and we made a commitment in our scientific conferences that we make available a Demetarian meal. It means the chef is cooking with half the amount of meat for everybody than he would have done before. As to say that when it comes to, let's say, personal ethics, it's a question of, do I want to eat meat and dairy or not? But when it comes to environment, it's about how much. And that means everybody can make a difference. Every choice to eat a bit less meat is going to be, has benefit for the environment. So going for half is a simple aim, and it means that you can massively reduce your nitrogen footprint. Let's take an example of what you might do in agriculture to reduce losses to the atmosphere put together a club of your best measures, maybe you'll get 40%, 50% effect reduction. If Europe were to halve the amount of meat and dairy we eat, we'd reduce pollution by 40%. So imagine putting the two of those together. They're both really powerful.
Oh, that would be quite the impact. Just before we go on to my final question, actually, a big thank you to UKRI for supporting this whole series of conversations around the Sustainable Development Goals. UK Research and Innovation works in partnership with universities, research organisations, businesses, charities and government to create the best possible environment for research and innovation to flourish. Through its investments in research for international development, UKRI is proud to support and contribute towards global efforts to achieving the SDGs. Now, Daze, Mark, what I always like to do before I throw the final question at you is, do you have a question for each other? So let's start with Mark. Do you have a question for Daze?
Yeah, I've got a question for you, Daze. I spend a lot of my time talking to the United Nations, and I see that the countries, they want to change, but it's really slow. To get a substantial major agreement is hard. Now, it's not my job to say how far they should go, because people want me to be neutral. They want a level balance of evidence. But from your perspective, you clearly want to accelerate things. How would you see that the UN could accelerate change for climate action, sustainable development?
Thank you, Mark. I think the UN need to think radically. We are in a situation that cannot be predicted, and we need to act with caution. We need to make sure we say, okay, we don't know what may happen. The science is, it's concrete that climate change is happening, but we don't know the severity. So why should we wait till everything's already messed up to try and do something about it? And I think that's for me, that's the issue, because politics works so much with the short term. So you're thinking about, how can I get elected in the next 5 years, rather than how can I make a better future for the society that's currently living now and forever, and this is kind of where we have to just start asking more of our politicians. We need to tell them, we vote you in to protect us, to take care of us, and you're not doing so we're going to ask you to do it, or we're going to take it into our own hands. And obviously I say practice civil disobedience. There's so many different ways you can be radical and have civil disobedience. You don't need to be in a road and gluing on. You can actually just stand up to power in your own homes, and that's more than enough.
And Daze, same to you. Have you got a question for Mark?
Yeah, actually. So I've been looking into the ideas of soil degradation. So could you go over it just a bit more? Because I feel like it's a really interesting topic, and I feel like a lot of the audience at home would love to know a bit more about what our soil is looking like currently in the UK and how can we improve it.
And also, Mark, just to add to that, the contribution that soil degradation actually makes towards climate change and the climate crisis.
So I think when it comes to the soil, we clearly want a healthy soil. And that will often mean that we want a really good amount of organic matter in it. So too much farming, just taking out without replacing, is not going to be good for storing the carbon in the soil. The next thing is that the carbon and the nitrogen go together. They can't live without the other. So protein is part carbon, part nitrogen. Amino acids, they fit together. So in terms of actions, that the number one thing is a good, healthy soil. The challenge there is we have to not take out more than we put in. And I think one key thing for me is manure. Manure doesn't get much excitement. Whenever I want to talk about food, people are happy, but nobody wants to talk about manure. That is life. But manure is full of nitrogen, it's full of carbon. Good manure management, I think, is the thing we really need to do. In our South Asian Nitrogen Hub with GCRF, we worked out that in India alone, there's a street value, in this case urine, of $6 billion a year worth of urine that's not necessarily being made full use of. So around the world, our urine and our manure, I think, thinking about ways of getting it in the soil, avoiding it getting to the atmosphere, careful timing of crops, and of course, back to that food choice thing, nearly 85% of the harvest we have from our agricultural land in Europe is going to feed livestock. Only 15% is going to feed people. Now that's an amazing number, and it shows this whole point about let's optimize, tune our diet, recognizing the environmental consequences.
Gosh, super interesting. So urine really is liquid gold for the soils.
Great phrase.
All right, so I think what I'll do, I think we've got enough time to chuck 2 quick questions at each of you. So here's the first one. 3 top tips for our viewers who are watching for them to make a significant personal contribution to SDG 13, to climate action, to helping relieve the climate crisis. Mark, let's go to you first.
Okay, think about what you eat. I've said that already. But also bear in mind that long travel vegetables grown in a greenhouse halfway around the world also have an impact. It's not just the meat, so you've got to balance the whole story. The second one, of course, we all know about travel. Really think about your travel footprint. Of course, public transport is great, but using electronic means like this. And I think lastly, the whole energy saving story, it's not about nitrogen, it's about carbon here, but of course it's obvious energy saving opportunities.
Cool, thanks Mark. Same to you, Daze. Top 3 tips?
I think the first one would be learn from the people who've been taking care of the earth so well for so many generations, and that is the indigenous people of the world. They have lived with nature and they know what to do, and I feel like the Western, we've kind of messed this up a little bit. So I think it's really taking understanding from people who've been doing it so well, and I think that's what we need to do. I think also we need to start thinking about what do we see as impossible and start making that happen. I think we should aim for literally the stars and beyond, and then if we fall a bit short, at least we've done that. And that's why I think we should start thinking about more radical changes. And thirdly, I think we should put trust in the youth. I'm not even talking about people who are my age. Like, I feel relatively quite old in this youth movement, being 20. There are amazing young activists who really have power and have owned this issue as their own, and they are as young as 11, 12, 13, and they have ideas, and we should give them some power in making those decisions for their own future.
Fantastic answer. My last question was going to be, this is obviously a worrying, concerning situation that we are currently in, and it's only set to get worse. So my last question was going to be, what gives you faith in the future? Daze, you've just touched on it a bit, but Mark, what gives you hope?
I think it's about building trust with communities and people, and that's what we're seeing across all these Zoom platforms around the world. What I'm finding in our hub activities, that's this activity with UKRI in South Asia. We're working with 8 countries. We've had some amazing conferences together with up to 150 people, all these windows opening at once, and building that community of working together across national boundaries. There may be political differences, but the people themselves want to work together.
And Daze, last word to you then on this, about your hope for the future.
Yeah, I think it's really young people. I had the pleasure to teach a primary school class last year, and that changed the way that I saw the world, because they have such vivid optimism, where even though it feels bleak, they're so hopeful and they have ideas and they have the intelligence to bring these to life. And I think it's mainly just like giving the reins over and saying, you young people, we're here to support you and we're here to make things that you feel like are possible happen.
Brilliant. Thank you both so much. That's the end of our time together to explore SDG 13. Thank you for joining me and sharing your wisdom.
Thank you.
Thank you.